Welcome to Catalyze. I'm Sarah O'Carroll. I have with me Seth Sheldon from the class of '98. Seth is a United Nations liaison for the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN. The coalition was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for its work to bring about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Seth, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So before we look at the United States' involvement in nuclear arms research and production, I'm wondering if you might provide a more global outlook. Can you give us a sense of how many countries support nuclear disarmament?
An overwhelming majority of the world's countries, more than 2/3, support a total ban on nuclear weapons in the form of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Those are the countries that recognize the growing risk, the unacceptable consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, and the need to take more decisive action toward a world without nuclear weapons. That's at least 135 countries, and it's growing.
So the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW, outlaws the use, testing, development, production, possession, and transfer of nuclear weapons, and it also outlines how countries can destroy their own stockpiles. Tell us more about why the treaty was established and how its formation came about.
Basically, between 2013 and 2014, there were three conferences, one in Norway, one in Mexico, one in Austria, that led to an endorsement of a humanitarian pledge that sought to close that legal gap, that logical gap, to ban the most destructive weapons. In July, on July 7th of 2017, the most exciting day of my life, the text of the treaty was brought to a vote and was adopted by 122 yes votes to one no vote. This is, well, certainly groundbreaking. It's the first treaty to require its states parties to assist those who are affected by nuclear weapons use and testing.
Of course, the United States is among the group of nuclear-armed countries who have not signed the treaty. And in President Biden's first year in office, some Democratic lawmakers have been pushing him to take a bolder stance on the country's nuclear policy. What have we been able to learn so far about Biden's position on investing in nuclear weapons as part of our national defense strategy, and to what extent will his decisions be influenced or limited by the policies he inherited from the Trump administration?
Well, it would be very nice for some of us to think of this as a problem of Donald Trump's making, but it really isn't. And unfortunately, this is one thing that Democrats and Republicans alike have been equal opportunity offenders. The nuclear modernization program was really initiated under the Obama administration and was continued under Trump. The budget of this modernization program over the last year has been put in the range of like $1.7 trillion over 30 years. And I think that's, with inflation and expansion, is likely more. It's mind-blowing. It's like there's all kinds of ways we try to break that down. Like $100,000 per minute is one way that I like to think about it, because how do you wrap your head around those kind of numbers? So it's not looking good so far. I think we have a lot of work to do as Americans or as USers to influence what he's going to do.
Even $100,000 per minute is pretty hard to fathom. How does the United States compare to other nuclear-armed countries in terms of total annual spending? Where do we measure up?
During the pandemic, it's been even more outrageous. I mean, in 2020, we issued this report. You could find it on our website, the ICANN website, called Complicit, talking about this problem emanating from these 9 countries that spent $72.6 billion, I think it is, in 2020, which was an increase during 2020 from the previous year of $1.4 billion, I believe. So in the pandemic, that's like when we could have spent all this money on more human needs. How could that happen? Like, how can we say that we don't have the money for getting vaccines to the rest of the world? Or how do we run out of hospital beds and nurses and doctors? I mean, how is that the answer for security when it's, we are clearly facing such real problems with security? And the answer is money. I mean, that's what this Complicit report helps break down. That's what our partners Don't Bank on the Bomb project, which has been issued by PAX in the Netherlands every year, basically is showing us, is how much money is being spent and who's getting it. And in fact, the Complicit report is the first to do this, as far as we know, to really try and figure out not just which companies are getting that money and which companies are spending that money, but how much of it is actually going to lobbyists and also to think tanks. Because, when we talk about the prevailing consciousness in the US public around nuclear weapons, I think you can't ignore, or we need to stop ignoring, the impact that money cycle is having on the media and our policymakers, because these reports are being funded. The reports that they're reading and maintaining the status quo are being funded by the industry.
In addition to lobbyists and think tanks, ICANN has also reported on the role of U.S. universities in funding the United States nuclear arms complex, as ICANN calls it. And in ICANN's report, Schools of Mass Destruction, what are some of the covert activities mentioned, and how do universities receive support from the federal government to conduct them?
We're not just talking about these private investments, we're talking about how this money and resources gets given to and also taken from our nation's institutions of learning. And this pipeline that we built from schools to industry. Schools do all kinds of things. There's direct management they do, where a university directly manages a nuclear weapons lab. There's partnerships where the government partners with institutions for projects and research programs. And then there's these workforce development programs where school STEM programs are basically used as a pipeline to the industry. Universities are involved in all kinds of ways, and at least in this initial report, we've tried to identify the ones that are most directly involved in this process, and there are a lot of our most prominent universities.
So UNC Chapel Hill is the 12th largest university in the United States, and we rank 6th in the country for federal research expenditures. Was Carolina on the list, and how do we rank in terms of our participation in this apparatus of sorts?
Well, I'm happy to say that my alma mater is not on that list of these most involved universities. Well, one of my alma maters, I also went to law school at UC Berkeley, and the University of California is one of the key institutions maintaining the main research and production centers for the nuclear weapons complex. Los Alamos National Laboratory and Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And Berkeley, where I went, has been really involved ever since the Manhattan Project, where nuclear weapons originated. Carolina does not have that legacy, thankfully, but that doesn't mean that UNC isn't involved in other ways. And that's something that we have yet to really dig through and understand is, for instance, how much of our money is invested in nuclear weapons, and in what other ways our faculty individuals or basically labs might be invested in or part of the process in a less direct way.
And after reading the report's recommendations for students, faculty, and staff at Carolina and otherwise who would be opposed to their university's participation in nuclear weapons research and development, what can they do to uncover the extent of their institution's involvement, given the clandestine nature of these activities and programs?
I'd be really interested to look at how UNC invests money, for instance, because like I said earlier, I think that that's going to be the key, is make profiteering from nuclear weapons less profitable. We have investment funds that are entities that are managing the university's long-term assets, pension funds for faculty and administration. I wonder where that money is invested, and it's something that we can easily look into, and we built the tools for doing this through the Don't Bank on the Bomb research so we can look at that report for identifying what we're looking for, which is figuring out the companies that are responsible for maintaining and building our nuclear weapons and making sure they're not in our portfolios. We're just talking about a couple dozen companies that are doing this, that we would be asking the school in this case to take their money out of. And I think that's really doable. And that's something we've seen done basically as financial institutions are looking to define what ethical investing is. All we need to do is convince them that ethical investing should include not investing in nuclear weapons.
So once students have been able to identify hard numbers, either using ICANN's many resources or on their own, can you speak to other ways they might go about increasing awareness about these issues and advocating for the change they see as necessary?
Young people have energized the resistance movement and opposition to nuclear weapons since nuclear weapons existed, especially coming around in the 60s and the 70s. that's who we need to pick up the mantle today. The end of the Cold War gave so many people a false sense of comfort that we were through the crisis of nuclear weapons. And people have since, understandably, turned to other existential crises: climate change, the systemic institutionalized racism, refugee crises. I mean, there's so much right now to worry about. But I think what people need to realize is, despite the fact that we're not hiding under our desks the way we did in like the 50s through the 80s or whatever, this is, according to the experts, we're in more danger now than we ever were during the Cold War. Just to point to one example, I don't know if you've ever heard of the doomsday clock that's maintained by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. It's like a metaphorical symbol for how close we are to nuclear Armageddon. And it has, ticked back and forth during the Cold War. And it's maintained by many scientific experts and political experts, some Nobel Prize winners themselves. They say that needle is closer to midnight, the metaphorical Armageddon, than it ever has been. It's as close as it ever has been, even during the height of the Cold War. How can this be when no one's even talking about it in the way that they did then? A lot of their thinking, and those who agree with them, is connected to how nuclear weapons are actually, unfortunately, connected to all of these other crises, climate in particular. Nuclear weapons represent our climate's most acute danger, in the sense of what you may have heard of called like nuclear winter. The notion that any use of nuclear weapons anywhere would have catastrophic impact, even in regions far away from the conflict. So, like, a lot of the modeling has been done, like, say, the India-Pakistan conflict. Any use of nuclear weapons there, or even a limited use, could have effects on resource scarcity and crop, damage, global cooling in total other parts of the world. And so what we see is that there's a real risk that conflict can lead to use of or heightened risk of use of weapons, and for those who have them, use of nuclear weapons, even by accident. But that would, or miscalculation, but that would increase climate change, which spurs resource insecurity, and thus in itself increases conflict again, and increases the risk of nuclear weapons more. So this mutually reinforcing cycle of doom is really something that we need to pay attention to, insofar as it connects with nuclear weapons. And so I think that people on universities, people who are studying and concerned about global existential crises, need to think about this as well. If you go to our microsite for this schools of mass destruction, it's the URL is universities.icanw.org. We've just launched a pledge, basically saying that for students, for faculty, for alumni, basically anyone who works or is in the orbit of a university can sign and say that we're concerned about this, and we declare that we want our schools, our universities, to get out of or stay out of the nuclear weapons complex. And we ourselves will abstain from working on research and development for nuclear weapons. And we intend to use that pledge to build a network among activated university communities. And that's something I think that everyone can do.
Going back to the personal finance side, before I graduated college and started working full-time, I certainly didn't give a whole lot of thought to pension funds, let alone which companies my employer might be investing in. So what guidance might you give to alumni and scholars about similarly auditing where their money is going?
I mean, even a call to your bank, starting to ask these questions, has impact. And you can educate yourself a bit more by looking at this Don't Bank on the Bomb report and seeing what companies you're trying to identify and trying to get out of, and then just asking your bank. I mean, we've had people do this and in my city in New York, we've had our campaigners do this with a couple of specific banks effectively, sometimes to my amazement, that just a few people can make these calls and say, I'm just curious, where's my money? And then usually they don't know the people you speak to, and it takes some digging. And we've had some policies change just from a few small investors or depository holders calling their banks.
Well, Seth, appreciate your thoughts so far. If I can ask a more personal question, I want to know where this interest came from for you in studying nuclear arms issues, and how did you end up with ICANN?
Well, it's been kind of a long and varied journey, I guess, because this isn't something I've done for my whole life. But I do credit Carolina and therefore Morehead-Cain program for helping me get here. My main focus was in arts and music because that's what I came from. My whole family are artists and musicians, and but I got involved in and interested in a lot of political science, and our one professor in particular that I followed through some courses, got excited about um, nuclear weapons policy through some of those programs and courses, and then wrote my honors thesis on nuclear weapons and particularly the Israeli nuclear weapons program. And it was just this thing that really interested me. But then after graduation, I didn't really do much with that. Didn't even know what to do with it, honestly, and went into law and then also back into music. But I was doing a Fulbright program teaching law in Japan a few years back and visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki and realized again, I don't know how I could have forgotten, but basically it reignited my 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 strong interest in helping make a difference in this area. And then I knew that the UN was about to start negotiating this treaty, and I wanted to be a part of that. So I just figured out who to find in the ICANN network and get involved.
Well, very cool to hear how you made that happen. Seth, is there anything else you'd like to share about ICANN's work for those who similarly want to get involved?
We have so many projects through ICANN that people can participate in, and one of them, for instance, that I'm thinking about is the Cities Appeal. That's a project where cities and municipalities in nuclear armed states are joining, are basically taking a pledge, but in whatever way you do it, through your city council or mayor or something, to say that their city supports the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We've had hundreds of cities around the world join this. Major cities, Paris, Sydney, in the U.S., Washington D.C. to L.A., hundreds. In North Carolina, I think it's only Asheville. I'm not sure if any other city has joined. So maybe some student wants to get Chapel Hill, the town of Chapel Hill, or Carrboro, or Durham, Raleigh, to join. That could be. We could help them, through that process. And if they go to our website, they can find the Cities Appeal background. But you can also get in touch with me. You can follow us in all the medias. Our handle is @nuclearban. And check out our website where all of this is just like the portal to all the stuff I'm talking about, and start mobilizing our clubs and communities and extracurricular associations. Like a couple of years ago, I came down to speak with Sierra, the Carolina International Relations Association, about this stuff. Um, but just like whatever your whatever your starting point is great. I mean, people come at it from so many different ways, but the point is that we need to wake up and we need to all realize how much this affects all of us. We need to communicate that to our leaders, and we need, especially young people and future people who can speak on behalf of future generations, to get involved and to speak out. And if I can close with this, maybe, I mean, most of all, I think it's important as we go through, especially as we go through like our academic sort of curriculum, to make sure that we don't forget whenever anyone talks about nuclear weapons in the US, to like not when you're going through like all the game theory and institutionalized like academic practice and lore about the way we do what we do and why we did what we did. That's what I studied when I was at Carolina. And to realize that all of that realism and realpolitik obfuscates the more important reality, which is that any use of nuclear weapons, intentional or perhaps more likely accidental, would have a devastating consequence. And that's something that needs to be more at the forefront, especially now, of our discussions when we talk about what we're talking about, and not forgetting how much the harm the industry has already caused and continues to cause, in particular to marginalized communities. We can't forget this. Deterrence is a theory. The risks and the consequences are real.
Seth, thank you so much.
Sarah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that you're interested, and I hope that other people get interested also.
Thank you for listening to Catalyze. I'm Sarah O'Carroll, and that was Seth Sheldon from the class of 98. You can let us know what you thought of the episode or who you want to hear from next by emailing us at communications@moreheadcain.org or by finding us on Twitter or Instagram at Morehead-Cain.